The metal is moving. This week, the United States told its European allies, in a closed meeting of NATO policy directors in Brussels, that the submarines are leaving. Not all of them at once. Not with a press conference. A Pentagon envoy named Alexander Velez-Green set out the plan. Fighter jets cut by roughly a third. No submarines. Fewer drones and warships. And the Europeans to make up the difference themselves. The cuts are aimed at the NATO force model. That's the structure drawn up in 2022, in direct response to Russia's full-scale invasion, to put more force at higher readiness on the continent. European officials in the room were reportedly taken aback by the scale of it. That is the documented fact. Start with the hardware. Because hardware is the part that cannot be argued with. A submarine is not a tweet. It does not hedge or recalibrate or signal. It is either in European waters or it is not. And the decision this week is that increasingly it will not be. I want to walk through the week slowly, because the events only mean what they mean when you put them next to each other. Taken one at a time, each is a story that ran for a day and was gone. Taken together, they are the weather changing. The submarine reduction is not the whole of it. A planned deployment of the US 2nd Armored Brigade combat team to Poland, around 4,000 troops, has been cancelled. 5,000 personnel have been ordered out of Germany. The 2nd Infantry Brigade of the 101st Airborne is leaving Romania, with no replacement coming in behind it. And the UK, Poland and Lithuania have been told to expect delays on US weapons deliveries, while Washington refills the stockpiles it drew down during the Iran war. Delays that hit Ukraine's air defense supplies directly. This is the first visible physical reduction of the security guarantee that has underwritten European stability since 1945. The architecture remains. The nuclear umbrella remains. But the thinning has begun, and it has begun in metal rather than in words. I have spent a long time on this project arguing that there is a window, a dead spot, running roughly to the end of this decade, where Russian opportunity, European unreadiness, and American unreliability all overlap. I have held that argument carefully, at the level of plausible speculation, because that is where the evidence sat. This week moves it. The withdrawal is not a forecast anymore, it is an inventory. Then on Tuesday, the director of GCHQ stood up at Bletchley Park and put a figure on the other side of the ledger. Anne Keast-Butler, in her first public speech as head of the agency, said that almost 500,000 Russian soldiers have likely been killed since February 2022. It is the highest figure any Western government has put on Russia's war, and it is worth holding for a second what it actually means. The careful word is likely. This is an intelligence estimate, stated publicly by the person who runs Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency. It is not a body count anyone can audit, but it is now the official British position spoken on the record, and that puts it at the top of the evidential hierarchy. Almost 500,000 dead. More than the total number of Americans killed in the whole of the Second World War. Keast-Butler's reading of it was blunt. It shows Putin going backwards on the battlefield. Western officials are reportedly reaching a quiet consensus that Ukraine has gained a real edge for the first time in years, with Russia losing somewhere around 1,000 men a day in killed and wounded, and struggling to break through Ukraine's layered air defense. Here is where I have to be honest about what we do and do not know, because this is exactly the point where the analysis gets seductive, and you have to slow down. There are 3 serious analysts whose work runs through this project, and on the question of where the war is actually heading, they do not agree. That disagreement is not a problem to be tidied away. It is the most honest thing in the picture. John Mearsheimer reads it through structural realism. Russia wins in the end, through sheer material and demographic weight, grinding forward, absorbing losses Ukraine cannot match. Anders Puck-Nielsen reads it almost the opposite way. Russia's grinding campaign has hit a structural dead end against the density of Ukrainian drones. And a cornered Putin, who cannot win where he is fighting, has every incentive to change the game somewhere else. A Baltic probe, a Romanian-style grey zone push. Peter Zeihan reads it through the money. Ukrainian strikes have hit around 80% discrete energy targets, knocking out somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 million barrels a day of transport and pumping capacity. And once permafrost infrastructure is shut down, it can take decades to bring back. Zeihan argues Russia may not be exporting oil to the West by the end of the year. Notice what happens when you lay the GCHQ number against these 3. Mearsheimer's grinding advantage thesis depends on 2 things being true at once. That Russia can keep paying for the war, and that it can keep manning it. Zeihan argues the financial mechanism is being taken apart by drones. GCHQ is documenting the human mechanism running at 1,000 a day. Quite possibly faster than Russia can recruit to replace it. Both pillars are under pressure at the same time, from two completely different directions. That does not prove Mearsheimer wrong about the eventual outcome, but it means the grinding advantage, if it exists, is running on a much shorter clock than his framework assumes. So I will say plainly where I land, and where I do not. On American withdrawal and the unreliability of the United States as a security guarantor, Mearsheimer's structural analysis is the strongest thing on offer, and this week proved it. On the battlefield trajectory, the weight of independent analysis has moved against him. Nielsen, Zeihan, GCHQ, the Institute for the Study of War. He deserves engagement, not dismissal. But 4 serious readings, arriving at the same place on European exposure, from realism, from military analysis, from energy economics, and from signals intelligence, that is itself a form of evidence. The convergence is the point. What none of them can tell you is the thing that matters most. What a losing Russia does next. Which brings us to the most important small event of the week. A Russian drone struck an apartment building in Galati, in Romania. NATO territory. The first civilian injuries on NATO soil. By the count being kept, it is the 28th confirmed Russian drone incursion into Romanian airspace. The Romanian president convened the country's top defense body, and the acting Joint Staff Commander chose his words with enormous care. This was not an attack on Romania, he said. Though Russia remains a threat to regional security, read that carefully. Because it is doing 2 jobs at once. The first job is legal and political. Not an attack on Romania keeps the door to Article 5 firmly shut. Nobody in Bucharest, or Brussels, wants to be the person who triggered a NATO-Russia confrontation over a drone that may have strayed. The restraint is rational, and I want to be clear. I am not criticizing it. The second job is the one the political conversation will not look at directly. Every time the threshold for a collective response moves, every time the 28th incursion is, like the 27th, not an attack, Moscow learns where the line actually is. And the genuinely unsettling question is not whether the Kremlin reads this restraint as a green light. It is whether the Kremlin is simply indifferent to the signal. Because if Moscow is indifferent, then no deterrence message gets through. Short of Romania actually shooting drones down over its own towns, which is to say, short of the confrontation everyone is trying to avoid. This is the security forcing function, not a decision, an accumulation. The 28th incursion is not more dangerous than the first because it is bigger. It is more dangerous because it is the 28th. And the line has held by being quietly moved 28 times. And then there is Zaporizhzhia. Europe's largest nuclear power plant is reportedly approaching a critical state, its cooling systems strained by repeated power disruptions and the fighting around the site. Officials have warned of a point of no return. The warnings are documented. The physics of cooling system failure are documented. The specific timeline is not, and anyone who tells you otherwise is guessing. So this is plausible speculation, flagged as exactly that. But here is what makes it the defining shape of the moment. A catastrophe at Zaporizhzhia does not require anyone to decide to cause it. It needs only the continuation of present conditions. It is the grey zone pattern. The outcome reached with nobody's fingerprints on the trigger, applied to a nuclear site. It is the thing the political conversation is most actively organized not to mention. Now lift your eyes from Ukraine to the question this is really about, which is Britain. Run the European events of this single week side by side, and you get a picture that refuses to resolve into a slogan. On one side, consolidation. Poland and the United Kingdom signed a historic defense and security treaty this week, naming Russia as a strategic threat, in the very same days that Washington announced the withdrawal. The Visegrad bloc is functioning coherently now that Orban's Russia-aligned veto has lost its grip. Hungary's Peter Magyar made Warsaw his first foreign trip. And Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, the leader of the country most exposed, and the man who just signed that treaty with Britain, said it plainly. The pre-war era is over, and Europe must prepare for a conflict it cannot assume the Americans will turn up for. On the other side, fracture. This week, 5 NATO members blocked a proposal for allies to commit 0.25% of their economy to military aid for Ukraine. The UK, France, Spain, Italy, and Canada. And the Czech-led ammunition initiative, which has been supplying up to half of Ukraine's large-caliber shells, has lost half its funding countries. Down from 18 to 9, after Andrzej Babis took office in December on a promise not to pay for Ukrainian weapons, won national election. Half the funders gone. It would be easy to read those two columns as Europe pulling itself together and Europe falling apart at the same time, and to leave it there as a paradox. But look at who is in which column, and the paradox dissolves into something sharper. The states backing the funding plan were the ones already paying it. The Netherlands, Poland, the Baltics, the Nordics, the front line, the ones who can see Russia from their kitchen windows. The states blocking it were the large Western economies, including a Britain whose military contribution to Ukraine is the third largest in NATO, but amounts to only about 0.1% of its economy. The frontline East is consolidating. The comfortable West is hedging. That is the whole argument in miniature. This project has a name for it: the two clocks. There is a political clock. Leadership contests, polling, by-elections, the 6-week horizon a government actually lives on, and there is a strategic clock. American withdrawal, the architecture of European security, the slow grinding arithmetic of a continent, the two run at once, and they pull against each other. The Czech election is the political clock, putting a hole in the strategic clock in real time. Drama on the fast clock creates vulnerability on the slow one. Britain's national conversation is running almost entirely on the fast clock. Tony Blair is out arguing for Britain to keep faith with an Atlantic alliance whose submarines withdrew from European waters this week. Andy Burnham's name is being run up the flagpole over a by-election in Makerfield on the 18th of June. These are real political stories on the political clock. None of them is wrong to care about. But every one of them is being conducted as though the strategic clock were not also running, as though the question of which security architecture Britain actually belongs to were a problem for later, rather than the question this week's hardware just forced onto the table. Let me be clear about what I am not saying. I am not telling you Russia is beaten. The GCHQ number, assessment point one way. The reported claim that Putin's commanders have convinced him his objectives are still reachable, and the collapse of the peace talks point the other. I'm holding both. Because both are real. I'm not telling you European consolidation is sufficient. The Poland-UK treaty and the Visegrad realignment are genuine. The blocked funding and the halved ammunition coalition are also genuine. Both columns are true. I'm not telling you the submarines leaving means America has formally abandoned Europe. It means the metal is moving, and the conversation has not caught up with the metal. I am also not telling you that the trajectory described here is locked in. States adapt. Strategic shocks can accelerate the integration they failed to produce in peacetime. The Poland-UK treaty is exactly that mechanism beginning to work. The forcing function that hardens lines can also harden the right ones. Institutions sometimes move suddenly under pressure. And the next 12 months will tell us a great deal about whether Europe is one of those institutions or not. And I'm not telling you what Britain should decide. I'm telling you the decision can no longer be deferred by pretending the slow clock has stopped. The piece you are listening to describes the most plausible shape of where this is heading. It cannot model what no one sees coming. Events, as Macmillan said, dear boy, the honest analyst holds that space open. I read weather for a living. Before a group goes out, you look at the sky, the water, the way the cloud is stacking, and you make a call. Not because you can predict exactly what the afternoon will do, but because the conditions are already telling you what kind of afternoon to prepare for. The submarines have left European waters. Almost 500,000 Russian soldiers are likely dead, on the official British estimate. A drone has hit a NATO apartment block for the 28th time. Russia has just passed a law authorizing selected bank employees to shoot down drones. The war has reached the cashier's desk. A nuclear plant is sitting one prolonged power cut away from a catastrophe nobody has to choose. The question is not whether the weather is coming. The question is whether Britain has the conversation about which boat it is in before the weather arrives, or only because of it. The group that refuses to read the sky does not get a calmer afternoon. It gets the same afternoon, without the kit. Read the weather. This piece drew on reporting from The Telegraph, The Financial Times, The Kyiv Independent, ABC News, Euronews and the BBC, and on the work of John Mearsheimer, Anders Puck Nielsen, Peter Zeihan, and the Institute for the Study of War. It builds on earlier stay-in-the-room pieces, including The Long Steady Turn and The War After the War.